Ahoy there viewers and welcome back to Timbo's Oz Navy News. It's Thursday, 27th of February, and boy, it hasn't been a big week for the Navy this week. That would be an understatement with the Chinese task force and the Senate estimates hearings all happening at the same time. Anyway, let's get into today's headlines. US Virginia-class submarine arrives at HMAS Stirling. Chinese task group enters Great Australian Bight. Defence retires a third of its warships in 3 years. Anzac frigate availability at high point, says Chief of Navy. Light frigate decision expected in first quarter of next year. And HMAS Hobart completes regional presence deployment. Okay, let's get into it. Armed federal police officers observed the arrival of the US Navy's Virginia-class nuclear-powered submarine USS Minnesota to HMAS Stirling yesterday. The Minnesota's visit is the first of several planned US SSN submarine visits to Australia this year, a defence statement said. While in the West, members of the submarine's crew will participate in a US submarine command course, a training program for naval officers who are preparing to take command of a submarine. The next port visit to HMAS Stirling later this year will be a 3-week submarine maintenance period. As of earlier this morning, the Jiangkai-class frigate Hengyang, the Renhai-class Cruiser Zunyi, and the Fuchi-class replenishment vessel Weishanhu was operating approximately 296 nautical miles or 548 kilometres west of Hobart, entering the Great Australian Bight. The New Zealand and Australian Defence Forces are monitoring the group. New Zealand warships HMNZS Takaha and HMNZS Aotearoa on station. Takaha departed Whangarei on the North Island of New Zealand on 17th of February, bound for the Middle East. The ship has been aligned with the Royal Australian Navy monitoring the task force since 19th of February. HMNZS Aotearoa was directed to provide support to New Zealand and Australian vessels after conducting Antarctic operations, arriving around Tasmania on 19th of February, where the ship has been in continual service supporting both nations' vessels monitoring the task group. The Australian Navy has so far not revealed which of its ships is involved in a monitoring operation at the moment. HMAS Arunta had been the only ship named that was involved, but it has since returned to Sydney and conducted a change of command ceremony last Friday, 21st of February. RNZAF aircraft have been sharing the tracking and surveillance duties with the Royal Australian Air Force P-8A aircraft. Meanwhile, Defence Minister Richard Marles has urged Australians to take a deep breath over the Chinese warships off Australia's coast as the coalition intensifies its attack on the government's response to live fire drills last week, the ABC reported earlier today.
It's really important that we take a deep breath here. Our touchstone has to be international law. The Chinese task group, as I'm advised, is complying with international law. And why that matters is because there's actually a greater frequency of Australian Navy vessels closer to China than there are Chinese vessels closer to Australia. And we rely heavily on our rights under international law to be there. And it matters that we're there because that's where our trade routes are. And so we've got to use international law as our touchstone.
Defence has retired a third of its warships since the Albanese government came to power 3 years ago. An analysis of the fleet by the Australian Financial Review, published on Monday, showed that 14 ships, a frigate, 8 patrol boats, 3 survey ships and 2 mine hunters have been retired since May 2022 when Anthony Albanese won the election. Over that same period, 4 new patrol boats have joined the fleet. The net loss represents a reduction of almost a third of the Navy's commissioned surface ships, which now stands at 25. Former Rear Admiral Rowan Moffat said every new shipbuilding program for the past 25 years had started at least a decade later than it should have, meaning vessels were being retired without being replaced. Australia's Navy is in serious, accelerating and chronic decline, Moffat said. Fixing it will be expensive and take a long time. He said it was unfair to blame the Albanese government for the reduction in ships, and instead the problem had brewed for more than a quarter of a century because of poor advice from bureaucrats and the post-Cold War peace dividend reducing military spending. A spokesperson for Defence Minister Richard Marles said the government was acquiring the cutting-edge naval capabilities needed for the future and would more than double the size of the surface combatant fleet. Meanwhile, Chief of Navy Vice Admiral Mark Hammond told Senate estimates yesterday that he expected new ship Arafura to be commissioned into the Navy during the second quarter of this year, subject to satisfactory performance of trials and acceptance. The availability of Anzac frigates for operational service is at a high point, according to Vice Admiral Hammond. Speaking at Defence Estimates in Canberra yesterday, Hammond said he was very pleased with the capability and said they were still world-class Tier 2 surface combatants.
So one Anzac-class frigate has been decommissioned. That was HMAS Anzac. She is in the process of disposal at Henderson Shipyard at the moment, and that process involves harvesting spare parts to seed the supply chain for the remaining 7. Defence has an authority to consider decommissioning a second Anzac-class frigate next year. Consistent with my previous testimony, that'll be subject to a conditions-based assessment on the fleet and juxtaposed against the cost of ownership and the need to keep her in service. So that is a decision that has not yet been taken. Of the 7 Anzac-class frigates currently in service, 6 are fully crewed. I would characterise the availability of the Anzac-class frigate as being at a bit of a high point. I'm very pleased with the capability at the moment. It's met all the requirements of this particular activity and others, and we've sustained another surface combatant deployed during this period. I'd also highlight that the Anzac-class frigates are being fitted with a naval strike missile capability. So notwithstanding the age of the hull, we've conducted a lot of sustainment and maintenance on these ships. They are still world-class Tier 2 surface combatants, Senator.
Shoebridge also asked about the availability of the Navy's air warfare destroyers.
The availability of 3 air warfare destroyers continues to meet our preparedness requirements.
And so of the 3, can you tell me what the availability of those, the Hobart, the Brisbane and Sydney are?
Senator, this is one of those areas that I'm not going to go into specifics on, the operational disposition and readiness of the Royal Australian Navy fleet. Suffice to say that if you look at the last 12 months, we've had HMAS Hobart conduct several regional presence deployments. We've had HMAS Sydney do similar, as well as live missile firings as part of exercise RIMPAC, and we've had Brisbane deployed to the west coast of the United States to conduct a Tomahawk first-class missile. So all 3 ships have been available for their planned deployment windows, and again, Brisbane returned home on the 6th of January this year and Hobart deployed on the 6th of January. Overall, I'm really pleased with the availability of the air warfare destroyer program.
And it was revealed that 3 of the Navy's 6 Collins-class submarines were in the custody of the Navy, but again, Hammond declined to provide details, once again for security concerns.
Senator, there are 3 submarines in the custody of the Royal Australian Navy right now.
All right. In the custody of the Royal Australian Navy, but that's different for being actually deployable assets?
Senator, the disposition, the operational disposition and readiness of the Royal Australian Navy fleet is something that I'm not prepared to go into further detail on for security reasons.
Deputy Secretary for Naval Shipbuilding and Sustainment, Jim McDowell, says he expects the government to make a final decision on which general purpose frigate will be selected for the Navy in the first quarter of next year. Here's what he had to say at Senate estimates yesterday.
The decision will be made, so there is we will go back to government later this year with some more details on the part of the programme particularly that relates to the onshore-offshore build. So the first 3 of these ships will be built in the parent country, and then the next 6 or 7 or 8 or however many we'll have in here. And then we would expect a government decision in the first quarter of next year.
First quarter of next year. Okay.
So it's an extremely aggressive programme. You know, we started it. We're going to do a complete evaluation of a complex warship from start to finish in just a little bit over 2 years. It would normally take us 7, 8, 9, even 10 years in the past to arrive at that sort of decision.
At a press conference earlier today, Defence Minister Richard Marles said the government wanted a decision made this year. So let me be clear about that. And we want to see the quickest transition from an overseas build to an Australian build at Henderson in Western Australia. Our number one objective here is speed into service. HMAS Hobart has completed the first regional presence deployment for 2025 after departing Australia on 17th of January. The Green Ghost sailed 8,000 nautical miles and participated in multilateral training, including the Indonesian-led exercise Komodo 25, the French-led exercise La Perouse 25, and the maritime cooperative activity with Japan, the Philippines, and the United States during its 6-week deployment. Meanwhile, HMAS Sydney will support the second regional presence deployment for 2025, which will include exercise Bersama Shield alongside 5 defence arrangements partner nations Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore and the United Kingdom. I'll put the links to the AFR article and the Senate's Senate Estimates Defence Hearing live stream video in the description box below if you want to check it out. Well, viewers, it's been a big week. We've got the Chinese Navy Task Force heading this way. It'll be interesting to see what happens when they get into our neighbourhood and if they get up to any evolutions if they sail up along the west coast. So stay tuned. Until next time, that is all.